the Tiger is back. Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're going to do a video on our Sunbeam Tiger. For you guys who follow the channel mostly for Porsche content, this might be fun just to see how different this kind of concept is from our air-cooled technology. One of the problems I've had with this car has been the carburation and intake manifold situation. And ironically, you know, when I first built the engine and put this all together, I had the intake manifold and carburation correct for this car, this engine. Everything was just right. This thing ran like a top. It was so strong and so responsive. But shortly thereafter, and I don't quite remember the timeline as things evolved, but what happened is, let's say about a year into the restoration and driving it around, it started having hard start problems, starting it up in the morning cold, getting a little bit tougher and tougher, idling rough, and you know, I'm trying all kinds of things to get this worked out, adjusting the carburetor, timing, everything. I just don't know what's going on, because for the first, approximately year, this thing ran great. To date, we have about 2,200 miles on this car, which is not really a whole lot. But I'm going to say the first maybe 300 or 400 miles are really the best miles. And then after that, we just got into a situation where we started chasing our tail, trying to fix the issue, what was wrong with this car. So for you Tiger guys out here, this might be interesting to follow along and see what we're going to do to correct this problem and where it went wrong, and what led us so many years down the wrong road as to why this car didn't run properly. And I've had several carburetors on here, and today we're going to put on a new Holley 650. It's a double pumper, no choke, mechanical secondary, and I believe that carburetor with this intake manifold is going to correct all the problems. Originally, when I put this together, I had a Wind 7515 single plane manifold with a Demon 650 carburetor. It was also double pumper, mechanical secondaries, no choke, and that was really the best combination for what we have here. We have about 10.5 to 1 compression ratio on our pistons, high flow AFR airflow research heads. We have a pretty aggressive cam in here, 280 hydraulic, and some roller rocker 1.72 rockers in here. So the whole setup really is pretty aggressive, especially for this car. Okay, so then fast forwarding about 20 years later, and here we are getting everything resolved. So what happened here was we had intake manifold gasket failure. That was the real problem. And it was very slowly progressive, and it would be very hard to diagnose unless you accidentally just pulled the intake manifold off for some reason, and we did, and that's how we found it. Or you would still be chasing your tail trying to figure out what the heck went wrong when everything was running so right. We had this manifold on here, and we had intake manifold gaskets that were recommended and manufactured by AFR, Airflow Research. These were the recommended gaskets to use for this application. And I remember the phone call when I called and asked, you know, what do we use here? Felpro, because I'm used to Felpro gaskets. They have a metal lamination on the interior. It's kind of like a graphite impregnated, very strong intake manifold gasket. But the ports are going to be a little bit different on the head. So I'm just following AFR's lead and their tech advice, and they strongly recommended I go with their gasket. So I got the gaskets in. I'm looking at them. I'm going, well, there's nothing really special about these gaskets. They don't look to be as strong and as durable as the Felpros, but I went ahead and used them. And they were just a composite type gasket. There was no lamination in there. There was nothing tough about them, nothing special about them at all. So what had happened is on the water ports, as the water circulates, the composite was getting wet as the water would settle down. Gravity would settle to the bottom of the gasket, and it would start breaking down the gasket, and the water then would bleed, water/antifreeze combo, would bleed along the bottom side of the gaskets, both sides. And as the engine was running, you had a vacuum pull from the bottom of that gasket, which was pulling material of the composite out and sucking it into the engine. So basically we were getting like water injection and like vacuum leak at the same time. Now I run a 70-30 mix because I like to keep this engine running as cool as possible. 70 water, 30 antifreeze is my ratio. Living in the desert, we don't really have anything to worry about with the cold. But that was the problem, and how I discovered that is I was going to switch out the manifold and go with a time period correct Edelbrock F4B, which was more like the Tiger guys would put on their cars. And I thought, well, maybe it'll run better with that. But when I pulled it off and I saw the carnage, like, well, that's what the problem was. And wow. So I put the F4B manifold on with new Felpro gaskets. I do not recommend using any AFR gaskets at all, because that's what you're going to get into, or could get into. Maybe they fixed them since then. I've been on their website, I've looked at them. It doesn't look like they've changed anything. And it doesn't look like there's been any updated tech advice. So I would just stay away from any kind of composite intake manifold gaskets for this kind of application. I installed the F4B. That, of course, the running dynamic is going to be different with that. I put a Demon 650 carburetor on there with a vacuum advance, which was terrible for this car, and a choke, thinking, well, maybe it's more tame. It's just got too much going on. That was a combination that never really worked out. And then, of course, this car sits a lot, so I have problems with the diaphragms drying out, the accelerated pump diaphragms, and all kinds of carburation issues when the carburetors go dry with our terrible fuel here. And ended up getting rid of that carburetor and put a Holley 600, same configuration, vacuum advance with electric choke, and that was terrible. Then it ran a lot leaner and a lot hotter. That thing ran terrible. So it pushed me to just set the car down this year, take it apart, and get in here, put it back to originally how we had it. And the reason it's been down so long is I've been trying to acquire a new or like new condition Demon 650 that I had on here, but they don't make them anymore. So after waiting all year, no results on that. So we're going to go with a Holley 650 double pumper and mechanical advance and tune it up from there. So let's get in closer and take a look and see exactly what this looks like before we finish up with our carburetor. And we'll have a look at our carburetor manifold on the bench. I'll show you what the issue was with the gaskets there. And we'll have a look at our fuel line delivery system from the rear of the car to the front. That's something I change out every 5 to 6 years anyways, because I really am not a big believer in like these old cars and the way they ran fuel lines in those days, just letting them go for too long. Just periodic maintenance. Should change all the rubber in that every 5 or 6 years. And we'll take a look at the condition of that, see what that looks like. So by the end of today, we should have a running car with all new fuel, rubber, front to back, and hopefully we can get this thing started up and take it out for a drive. Okay, and then having a look now at our wind single plane manifold. So you can see we got direct shot down the throat of this guy, right into those heads. So this is a real good performing manifold. And how I picked this manifold originally is some of the hot rod magazines at the time, they did various combinations of the small block Ford, and this particular manifold with a almost identical setup I've got internally, because I'm just trying to copy or blueprint something that was actually proven to work and have good dyno results. This particular setup here was putting out about 470 horsepower on pump gas, and that was what I was trying to get at, was something that had decent torque and decent horsepower and a decent RPM range. And this manifold really worked well for a single plane. Most of the street setups will be a dual plane intake manifold, but for this engine, this one worked really good. And then taking a look at our F4B manifold that I have pulled off of there, so you can see it's quite a bit different dual plane configuration. Both these manifolds are high rise in their makeup, but here was the problem. So what was happening was water was coming out of our crossovers here on both sides, and it was settling in on the gasket, right, and then just kind of bleeding over time as it just stayed wet all the time. So as it's in this position, you can see water is just going to settle down there and eventually start rotting that away if you have a composite type gasket. And then you're going to have the suction and the vacuum from your valves pulling in here, and that's what's going to pull your gasket apart. Before you know it, you're going to have a hairline fracture in there. You're going to be sucking all kinds of air and all kinds of water and debris in there. Nothing really harmful there, although your car doesn't really run very well on antifreeze. But it's not uncommon to have some kind of water injection technology on some of these cars. And this is going to be our carburetor for this setup, and I think this is going to finally take care of all our problems. And I've had to custom make a fuel delivery from the main fuel line feed to the carburetor. This is a dual feed situation, and typically we would have something like this, but this is not going to work because, and I've bought a couple of different ones here that are different length and different bends in them, but what's happening back here by my hand here is this would be hitting into the firewall. So we had to do something a little bit different. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking one and I cut that section out of there. You can see how long that is. And I'm just using these as our transition points. So I've made a T here, and I've got the main coming up into it. We're going to tee off right here with our 3/8. So we got 5/16 in, 3/8, 3/8 with a T, and a rubber hose connect onto that, and that should work. And then one other modification we're going to do before we install this onto the car, even though everything in here is brand new. So I've already pulled out one accelerator pump diaphragm. So this is one that was installed in here, and this is factory. The problem with these is that their failure rate is pretty high. So these aren't going to last very long with our ethanol blend, and if the carburetor dries out, these things are shot. They'll just turn hard, and then you won't have any working accelerator pump diaphragms. So I'm going to switch it out to a ethanol alcohol friendly type diaphragm, a little bit more hardy, a little bit more heavy duty, and hopefully that negates the ethanol blend issues you'll have with accelerator pump diaphragms. Okay, so that's pretty much the long and short of it. What we're going to do here today, we're going to bolt this guy on, switch out our accelerator pump diaphragms. Let's go ahead and take a look now and see when I had the car jacked up in the back, what I had to do to maintenance all the fuel lines in the rear. So let's take a look and see what's going on with our fuel lines back here and what's different about this particular car as opposed to some, and why I'm always cautious about fuel lines and doing routine maintenance on them. So as we all know, the modern fuels are just so caustic. Every 5 to 6 years, I like to switch out my rubber fuel lines and fuel filter, regardless of the mileage. I do it because of the timing and the age of things, and I just want to know in my mind everything is still fresh and supple and not deteriorating, especially with the location we have here. So you can see my muffler running right underneath the fuel pump and fuel lines, and believe it or not, this is a factory location for a fuel pump and fuel lines in those days, which is also another really good reason why we always carry a fire extinguisher with us on these older cars. Everywhere we go, every time we start it up, want to make sure we have a fire extinguisher just in case, because of stupid things like this. Now this was the original location, original layout, and today we would never have anything like this. Fuel pump would be in a remote location away from any heat sources, and the fuel line would probably be running more up the side of the car rather than over a hot muffler. I've made a custom heat shield for this. Let me go ahead and wrestle with that. We'll get that put in there and you can see what that looks like. Okay, and then having a look at our heat shield then put into place, you can see that we have good air flow around it. We have good deflection from the muffler directly up to it. and that pretty much negates the high temperature radiant heat coming off that muffler directly to our fuel pump. All right, let's go ahead and look at the line I pulled off of there and see what that looks like after 5 years. Okay, so then looking at our old canister and fuel line, actually after 5 years, I use high pressure fuel injection hose for all these kind of areas because it really is the most durable to hold up to our modern fuels. Just regular fuel hose, I wouldn't trust that more than a week or so on something like this. But this seems to hold up fairly well, and it still fills fairly supple. I don't see any kind of decay on it after 5 years. This is a Gates brand. Seems to work really, really well. Honestly, you could probably go 10 years with this, wouldn't have any issues. I do it just for routine maintenance every 5 to 6 years. But if you had to leave it go, I'm sure you would be fine with this high quality fuel injection hose. So that pretty much concludes the maintenance work on the back end of the car. Let's go ahead and get this guy set back on the ground and get back to work on that carburetor. So I've already drained out the old gasoline. Probably been sitting around for almost a year, and got most of that out of there. So now we're just adding some fresh 91 octane, and we'll be checking for leaks overnight from the back end. And after we prime the carburetor, then we'll also check for leaks around the fittings and fuel hoses and see how we do overnight. If everything looks good, then we'll go ahead and finish buttoning up the carburetor and prime the engine with oil and see if it'll start. Okay, so far so good, but we haven't let it set overnight. We'll see how that does. Hopefully we're going to be okay there. Okay, so now we've got everything hooked up and hopefully all our connections are tight. If I'm going to leak anywhere, my guess is going to be in here or here. Quality of these fittings was like marginal at best, but I got them as tight as I can get them. So we'll have to see what happens there. All our linkage is lubricated. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring on the fuel, hook up our battery, electric fuel pump, and we're going to bring it up gradually, a little at a time, as to not overwhelm our floats and stick them. So we'll bring it in, turn the key off, bring it in, turn the key off, until we get, hopefully, in the middle there. And then hopefully we don't have gasoline shooting out of there. Let's see what happens. Okay, we got gas. We've left it sit overnight. I've got some paper towel in here just to verify we don't have any seepage or any kind of fuel coming through there. We have nothing coming out of the back end of the car. Everything looks to be sealed and nice and tight on our carburetor. Now we're going to prime our oil pump and replace our distributor and see if we can get this car started. Okay, direction is counterclockwise for this car. And we know we're getting good fuel delivery here. I'm just going to put this back on for first startup to help out if we have backfiring through the carburetor. We don't want any flame shooting out of there. Here we go. Something don't sound right. Okay, let's try this again. Number 5 plug wire was not seated. Should have better luck this time. Got good oil pressure. Warmed up a bit. Still going to have to do some timing and some carburetor adjusting for fine tuning. I'll pull the distributor out of there. But I think we're going to be okay. Okay guys, let's buckle up and see if I can remember how to drive this thing. Okay, so I can already tell we have some improvement. So just taking off in first gear, what was happening before is I would just start to feather the clutch and the engine would just stall. I couldn't keep up enough revs to make a transition. So that was the biggest problem, was just getting it out of first gear into second gear without stalling, because there just wasn't enough fuel delivery to make that transition. But it seems like now, much smoother. Behaving just like it should. I have to excuse our bumpy camera a little bit. I've just got it mounted to my mirror. Okay, now we're going. Wow. Yeah, lots of acceleration. Okay, yep, the Tiger is back. So we just go ahead and take this thing back now. Just, I know it's going to work. It's accelerating properly. It's coming off the line and shifting properly. What I want to do is take it out this weekend early. Nobody's around, and do a nice test and tune on it. We can set the timing, play with the carburetor adjustments, the idle air mixtures, and really get it dialed in. And then we'll do some proper driving video and see what this thing's really like. It's just downright brutal. Lots of acceleration. Okay guys, well that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next video.